Usually when you talk about history, there's this like expectation of precision. It's almost like engineering. You dig up a ruined city, you carbon date a piece of broken pottery, and the archaeologist just points at a timeline and says, yeah, there it is. That's exactly what happened in 1200 BC.
Right, yeah. It's comforting to view history that way. I mean, we like the past to be this visible, quantifiable thing that we can just, categorize neatly into a textbook chapter. Fact or fiction, clean lines.
But then you step into the world of ancient mythology, into the very foundations of human storytelling, and suddenly that carbon dating machine is completely useless. We're looking at a literary and historical landscape that isn't just murky, it's an absolute labyrinth. Okay, let's unpack this. Because today, our mission is massive.
Oh, it really is.
We are pulling together this huge stack of sources. So we've got Wikipedia articles covering the epic, the Trojan War, the Bronze Age historical context, and then we're pairing that with brilliant analysis from shows like The Rest is History and The Life Guide. We're putting all this together for a deep dive into the full history of the Odyssey.
And I think we really need to emphasize to everyone listening that we are not just doing a plot summary of a Greek myth today.
No, absolutely not.
We are investigating a 2,800-year-old narrative that essentially serves as the blueprint for Western literature, culture, and honestly, our entire modern understanding of what a hero's journey even is.
Yeah, the Odyssey is like the ultimate survival story. And what's so compelling is that the survival aspect applies just as much to the physical existence of the text itself as it does to the guy trying to sail home on a raft.
Exactly. It's a miracle we even have it.
Which is exactly where I want to start.
Yeah.
Before we can get to the monsters and the whirlpools and the angry gods, we have to talk about the origin of the ship we're sailing on. Who actually built this story? Because, I grew up with this image of a guy named Homer, right? Like some blind, bearded, solitary genius sitting in a storeroom in ancient Greece, dipping a quill into ink and writing book one. But our notes on the Homeric question suggest that is entirely wrong.
It's completely wrong, yeah. That image of the solitary genius is perhaps one of the most enduring myths about the myth itself. For centuries, people just accepted it. But modern scholarship has essentially dismantled the idea of Homer as, like, a guy at a desk writing a novel. The Iliad and the Odyssey didn't just spring fully formed from one mind. They are the culmination of hundreds of years of oral tradition.
So, meaning generations of people telling these stories out loud around fires, changing them, adapting them, long before the concept of a book even existed in Greece.
Precisely. And the mechanics of how that actually worked, it remained a total mystery until the early 20th century. Think about it. How does a culture pass down a 12,000-line poem without a single written reference?
It sounds impossible. I can barely remember my grocery list.
Right. Well, the breakthrough came from an American scholar named Milman Parry and his assistant Albert Lord back in the 1920s and 30s. What's fascinating here is how they completely upended classical studies by looking outside of ancient Greece.
Yeah, and the notes we have on Perry, they read like a movie script. He died incredibly young, right?
Whoa.
Like 33 years old from an accidental gunshot wound.
Yeah, it remains one of the great tragedies in classical scholarship. A hotel room accident with a firearm cut his life incredibly short, but in his brief career, Perry revolutionized how we understand ancient literature. Before his death, he traveled to Yugoslavia.
Why Yugoslavia, of all places?
Because there were still illiterate bards living there, singers of tales who could recite epic poems that were hours long, entirely from memory. Perry wanted to study their brains, essentially. He wanted to understand the software they were running.
Because, again, 12,000 lines. Did he figure out their trick?
He did, and the revelation was mind-blowing. They weren't actually memorizing the poems word for word.
Right, really?
Yeah, it wasn't rote memorization like an actor learning a script. They were composing the poetry on the spot in real time during the performance.
Wait, so they were improvising, like modern freestyle rappers?
Yes, exactly. Or think of a highly skilled jazz musician.
Oh, I like that. Okay, let me try to run with that jazz analogy. If I'm a jazz pianist, I know the underlying chord progression, so let's call that the basic plot. I know Odysseus has to get from the beach to the cave.
Right, you know the destination.
But the exact notes I play to get there, the specific solos, I'm improvising those in the moment, relying on musical licks or phrases that I've practiced thousands of times, so my fingers just know what to do while my brain plans the next measure.
That is the perfect way to understand it. The ancient Greek bards, who were called rhapsodes, were essentially the jazz musicians of the spoken word. They were improvising over a highly structured rhythm. In ancient Greek epic poetry, that rhythm is called the dactylic hexameter.
That sounds incredibly intimidating, dactylic hexameter.
I know, it sounds like a math equation, but it's just a technical term for a specific beat. Think of it as a line of verse with 6 metrical feet, usually containing between 12 and 17 syllables. It has this very rolling, oceanic, driving rhythm to it.
So how do you improvise in that strict rhythm without messing up?
To keep that rhythm going without stuttering, the rhapsode used those licks you mentioned. We call them mnemonic devices.
Like when the text says swift-footed Achilles or gray-eyed Athena, I always thought those were just, overly poetic adjectives to make it sound fancy.
Oh, not at all. They serve a strictly mechanical purpose. They are pre-packaged metrical building blocks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if a bard needs to end a line and has exactly 5 syllables left to fill, he reaches into his mental toolbox and pulls out Gray-Eyed Athena. It fits perfectly.
That is so smart.
They also had what we call type scenes, standardized modular descriptions for putting on armor or preparing a ship or eating a meal. They could just plug those modules in almost on autopilot to give their brain a few seconds to figure out the next major plot movement.
So when our sources talk about the dating of the text, pinning it down to somewhere around the 8th or 7th century BC, that is a profoundly important moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that is exactly when the Greeks were adapting the Phoenician alphabet.
It is the absolute tipping point of their civilization. The Odyssey straddles this incredibly fragile window in human history. It's the peak evolution of a centuries-old oral tradition colliding with the brand-new cutting-edge technology of the alphabet.
Which means we're incredibly lucky to even have it. Because if the alphabet had arrived 100 years earlier, the oral tradition might not have been as rich. 100 years later, and those bards might have died out before anyone thought to write it down.
Exactly. We owe its existence to someone, perhaps a guy actually named Homer, or perhaps a group of scribes, sitting down and using this new technology to freeze a live jazz performance into sheet music for the very first time.
Okay, so we understand the ship. We know how the story was constructed. But to understand the passenger, Odysseus, we have to talk about the storm he came out of. The Odyssey doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's a sequel. We need to set the stage with the Trojan War.
You really can't grasp the psychological state of Odysseus without understanding the trauma of Troy.
Right, so just to give a very quick high-level overview for anyone who needs a refresher. The Achaeans, which is the term Homer uses for the Greek coalition, have spent a decade fighting a massive war at the city of Troy. The catalyst is that Paris, a Trojan prince, absconded with Helen, the wife of the Spartan king Menelaus. So the Greeks launched this massive armada to go get her back.
And they just get stuck. For 10 years, it is an absolute meat grinder on the beaches of Asia Minor. Neither side can gain a decisive advantage. The Iliad covers just a few weeks of this agonizing, decade-long deadlock. The beaches are soaked in the blood of an entire generation of young men.
And looking at our notes on Odysseus specifically, he is not your typical Bronze Age superhero, is he? Like, he isn't Achilles. He isn't this towering, unstoppable demiguy who just wades through armies.
Not at all. Odysseus is the king of Ithaca.
Which our sources describe as a small, rocky, relatively poor island off the western coast of Greece. He's a minor king in the grand scheme of the Greek coalition. He doesn't have the massive wealth of Mycenae or the military machine of Sparta.
Right, and because he lacks that sheer physical dominance or overwhelming resources, Odysseus has to rely entirely on his intellect. He's the ultimate tactician, the pragmatist.
The guy who thinks his way out of a fight.
Yes. In a culture that values dying gloriously on a battlefield, Odysseus is the guy who prefers to survive by tricking you into walking off a cliff.
Which leads to his masterstroke.
Yeah.
10 years of the Greeks throwing thousands of bodies at the impenetrable walls of Troy, and Odysseus finally says, guys, let's use our brains. He comes up with the Trojan horse.
The most famous military deception in history.
Seriously?
The Greeks feign a retreat, pack up their ships, and sail just out of sight, leaving behind a massive wooden horse as a supposed offering to the gods for a safe journey home.
And this is where the sources get really fun with the trivia. I had always pictured a Hollywood version of this, right? Maybe a dozen sweaty guys crammed in a hollow wooden belly waiting for nightfall. But there was actually a lot of debate in antiquity about how many men were in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
The notes mention a lost poem called the Little Iliad.
Yes, the Little Iliad was part of the wider epic cycle, which is basically the extended universe of Trojan War stories. And it claimed that an astonishing 3,000 men were hiding inside the horse.
3,000 men. That's not a horse, that's an aircraft carrier.
It's a classic example of mythological hyperbole. I mean, as the stories grew, so did the numbers. Later, more grounded traditions usually settle on somewhere between 30 and 40 of their absolute best warriors.
Regardless of the head count, the trick works. The Trojans drag this huge monument inside their impregnable walls. They throw a massive victory party. They all pass out drunk, and the Greeks slip out of the horse. They open the gates. The armada returns under the cover of darkness, and they sack the city. But the sources are very explicit about how this goes down. It wasn't a noble, honorable victory.
No, it was an atrocity. The sack of Troy was a brutal massacre. The Greeks, fueled by 10 years of pent-up rage and grief, cross every conceivable moral line. They murder children, they enslave women, and most dangerously, they desecrate the temples of the gods.
They violate the sacred rules of sanctuary. And that is the inciting incident for the Odyssey. What should have been a relatively straightforward sail back across the Aegean Sea turns into a catastrophe because the gods are furious. They set a massive storm that shatters the Greek fleet, and Odysseus gets blown completely off the map.
He is pushed out of the known geography of the Mediterranean and into a realm of pure myth and nightmare.
So the 10-year war is over, but a 10-year maritime nightmare is just beginning.
Let's get into the Wanderings, the section of the poem that contains all the greatest hits.
These are the episodic trials. They make up books 9 through 12 of the epic, a section scholars refer to as the apologoi.
And it starts almost immediately with a psychological threat. A storm blows them to the land of the lotus eaters.
It's such a fascinating opening trial because it requires no physical violence whatsoever. The locals just offer Odysseus' scouting party the lotus fruit, and whoever eats it loses all desire to ever return home. They lose their memory of who they are and what their purpose is. They just want to languish in this narcotic apathy forever. It's the terrifying idea that you could just give up. Odysseus literally has to drag these men who are weeping and fighting him back to the ships and tie them to the rowing benches beneath the decks just to get them away.
He has to force them to survive.
Exactly. But if the lotus eaters are a mental threat, the very next stop is peak physical horror. They land on the island of the Cyclops.
This is where we meet Polyphemus, a giant one-eyed monster who herds giant sheep.
So Odysseus and his men wander into the giant's cave, looking for food and hoping for hospitality. Polyphemus returns, drives his flock inside, and seals the entrance with a boulder so massive that 20 wagons couldn't move it. And then he discovers the men.
He doesn't offer hospitality. He grabs 2 of Odysseus's men, smashes their heads against the rocks like puppies, and eats them raw. It's incredibly visceral, gruesome violence.
And Odysseus realizes he's trapped. Even if he sneaks up and stabs the giant in his sleep, they'll all slowly starve to death because they can't move the boulder blocking the door. He has to use his intellect.
This is the definitive Odysseus moment.
He steps up and offers the giant some incredibly potent, undiluted wine he brought from the ship. He gets the giant blackout drunk. Polyphemus asks for his name, and Odysseus says, "My name is Nobody." In ancient Greek, Audis.
A brilliant, life-saving linguistic trick.
So the giant passes out and vomits. Odysseus and his remaining men find a massive wooden club, sharpened to a point, harden it in the fire, and then drive it directly into the Cyclops' single eye, blinding him. Polyphemus wakes up screaming in agony, blindly thrashing around the cave. His screams wake up the other Cyclops living on the island. They gather outside the blocked cave and yell, "Polyphemus, what's wrong? Is someone attacking you? Is someone trying to kill you?"
And Polyphemus yells back through the rock, "Nobody is killing me! Nobody is attacking me!"
Which prompts the others to basically say, well, if nobody is hurting you, it must be a sickness from the gods. Go back to sleep. I mean, it is the ultimate dad joke, and it literally saves their lives.
It really does. The next morning, the blinded giant has to let his sheep out to graze. He rolls the boulder back just enough, but he sits in the doorway, running his massive hands over the backs of every sheep to make sure the men aren't riding them out.
So Odysseus ties his men underneath the bellies of the sheep. The giant feels the wool on top, and they slip right past him. It's a flawless escape. He is a genius. But okay, I have to push back on his status as a flawless mastermind here, because what happens next is just infuriating.
You're talking about his departure from the island.
Yes. They get to the ship. They are rowing away. They are safe. The trick worked perfectly. But Odysseus' ego just detonates. He stands at the back of the ship and screams back at the shore, taunting the giant. And then he says, if anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it wasn't Nobody. Tell him it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca. I mean, why self-sabotage? He literally gives a homicidal monster his full name and his home address. Why on earth would he do that?
To our modern sensibilities, it seems like staggering arrogance and stupidity. I get it. But to understand his motivation, we have to look at the foundational software of the ancient Greek warrior class. We have to talk about the concept of kleos.
Let's unpack kleos. What does that actually mean?
Kleos translates roughly to glory, renown, or what is heard about you. In this specific Bronze Age cultural framework, there is no glorious afterlife waiting for you. The underworld is just a miserable gray waiting room. The only immortality you can ever achieve is your Kleos, the stories people tell about you after you die.
So anonymity is literally a fate worse than death.
Precisely. If nobody blinded the Cyclops, then Odysseus gets zero credit for arguably the most brilliant feat of his life. His cultural programming dictates that he must claim the victory, even if it puts him in immediate physical danger. A Greek hero cannot abide being unknown.
But the cost of that glory is astronomical. Because Polyphemus isn't just a random monster.
No, he is the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea.
Yeah, so Polyphemus hears the name, wades to the edge of the water, and prays to his father. He uses Odysseus' full name and begs Poseidon to curse him. Poseidon hears the prayer, and from that moment forward, the ocean itself is actively trying to murder Odysseus.
Which is a horrifying prospect when you are commanding a fleet of wooden ships in the Mediterranean. You can't avoid the sea.
Right. The sea becomes a weapon, and the disasters just cascade. We don't have time to detail every single stop, but the trauma he and his men endure is relentless. They get the bag of winds from Aeolus that could blow them straight home, but the crew gets paranoid, opens it while Odysseus is sleeping, and blows them entirely off course.
And that paranoia leads them directly into the territory of the Laestrygonians.
This is a sequence that I think gets overlooked because the Cyclops is so famous, but the Laestrygonians are arguably the most devastating blow in the entire epic.
Oh, without a doubt. They are a race of giant cannibalistic beings.
The Greek fleet sails into this beautiful, narrow harbor surrounded by high cliffs. 11 of Odysseus' ships park inside the harbor. Odysseus, perhaps out of caution or paranoia, parks his single ship outside the harbor entrance.
And when the giants attack, they stand on the cliffs and hurl boulders down into the enclosed harbor. It's a slaughter. 11 ships are pulverized. The text describes the giants spearing the dying sailors like fish and carrying them off to eat.
Hundreds of men, the vast majority of their armada, gone in an instant. He sails away with just one ship. The survivor's guilt must be suffocating, and they immediately land on the island of Circe.
Circe is a fascinating figure, a powerful goddess and witch.
Yeah, a scouting party goes to her house, she feeds them, and then strikes them with a wand and turns them into pigs. With the help of the messenger god Hermes, who gives Odysseus a magical herb to resist her spells, Odysseus confronts her, draws his sword, and forces her to turn his men back.
And then the narrative takes a very characteristic mythological pivot. Having asserted his dominance, Odysseus and Circe become lovers.
And he just stays there. For a full year, the men are feasting, resting. It's almost like they just need a massive time out from the trauma. But eventually, his crew has to pull him aside and say, hey, we've been here a year. Aren't we supposed to be going to Ithaca?
When Odysseus finally asks Circe for permission to leave, she gives him terrifying news. He can go, but he can't go straight home. He has to consult the spirit of a dead prophet, Tiresias, which means he has to go to the underworld.
The Nekia, the journey to the realm of the dead.
This is a pivotal sequence. They sail to the absolute edge of the world, to the shores of the cosmic river Oceanus. The realm is shrouded in perpetual darkness.
And it's not like they just knock on a door and walk in. They have to perform this deeply unsettling ritual. Odysseus digs a trench in the dirt, sacrifices a black ram and a ewe, and lets their blood pour into the pit. And because the dead are just mindless, flitting shadows, they are drawn to the blood. They desperately want to drink it just to regain a few moments of consciousness and memory.
Imagine the terror of that scene. He is standing at the edge of this pit, holding his drawn sword, physically fighting off a swarm of shrieking ghosts who are trying to drink the blood, waiting for the specific spirits he needs to speak with.
He gets the navigational advice from the prophet Tiresias, but it's the other people he sees that give this scene its immense emotional weight. He's a man trying desperately to fight his way into a future, and to do it, he is forced to literally confront the ghosts of his past.
He speaks with Agamemnon, the former supreme commander of the Greek forces at Troy.
Agamemnon tells a horror story. He survived the 10-year war, sailed all the way home, walked into his palace, and was promptly murdered by his own wife and her lover. And you could feel the seed of paranoia being planted in Odysseus' brain. He hasn't seen his own wife, Penelope, in 15 years at this point. What is she doing? Can he trust her?
Then he sees Achilles, the ultimate warrior, the man who chose a short, glorious life over a long, obscure one.
And Achilles delivers one of the most depressing lines in all of literature. He tells Odysseus that he would rather be a dirt-poor living farmhand working for someone else than be the king of all the dead. It completely undercuts the heroic ideal of dying for glory. But the encounter that absolutely breaks Odysseus is when he sees a ghost he wasn't expecting.
His mother, Anticlea.
Yeah. When he left for Troy 15 years prior, she was alive and well. Seeing her shadow approach the blood pit is how he finds out she died.
He lets her drink the blood so she can speak. And she tells him that she didn't die of a disease or old age. She died of a broken heart waiting on the shore for a ship that never came.
It is utterly gut-wrenching. He tries to embrace her. He lunges forward 3 times to hug his mother, and 3 times his arms just pass completely through her shadow like smoke. The psychological toll this takes is immense. It raises the stakes of the entire journey. It's no longer just about his own survival. It's a race against time. He has to get back before his father dies of the same grief, before his wife loses all hope.
Armed with this desperate urgency, they leave the underworld. But the final leg of the journey is packed with lethal traps. First, the Sirens.
We all know the image, right? Creatures with voices so intoxicating that any sailor who hears them will hurl himself into the sea or crash his ship into the jagged rocks just to get closer. But Odysseus wants to hear the song, and he wants to live to tell the tale.
He instructs his men to plug their ears tightly with beeswax, making them completely deaf to the song. But he remains unplugged. He orders them to tie him to the ship's mast with heavy ropes.
And he gives them strict orders. He says, when I hear the song, I am going to beg you to untie me. I'm going to order you to set me free. Do not listen. Just tie the ropes tighter. It's such a powerful metaphor for binding yourself against your own destructive impulses. He writhes against the ropes, screaming at his deaf men, but they just keep rowing.
They survive the Sirens, only to immediately face the ultimate lose-lose scenario in ancient leadership, the Strait of Scylla and Charybdis.
It's a narrow channel of water. On one side is Charybdis, a massive swirling whirlpool that sucks down the sea and vomits it back up. If a ship gets caught, the entire crew dies. Everyone is lost.
On the other side is a cliff face harboring Scylla, a monster with 6 incredibly long necks and vicious heads. If a ship sails close enough to avoid the whirlpool, Scylla will dart down and snatch exactly 6 men off the deck.
It's an impossible choice. Sacrifice 6 men to guarantee the survival of the rest, or risk the entire ship on a gamble to save everyone. Odysseus chooses the cliff. He chooses Scylla. And he makes a very controversial leadership decision. He doesn't tell his men what's about to happen.
He knows that if he tells them a 6-headed monster is waiting, panic will set in. They will drop their oars, huddle in the center of the ship, and the current will drag them all into the whirlpool.
So he just tells them to row hard. And as they are watching the terrifying whirlpool on their left, Scylla strikes from the right. 6 of his strongest men are ripped, screaming into the air. The text says they are crying out Odysseus' name as they are being eaten alive against the cliff face. It's a staggering burden of command.
And all of this trauma, all of this exhaustion, it sets the stage for the final fatal mistake on the island of Thrinacia.
This is the island of the sun god Helios. Tiresias, the prophet in the underworld, was very explicit about this. He said, when you land there, whatever you do not touch the sacred cattle of the sun god. If you harm them, your ship and your men will be destroyed.
Odysseus gives his crew strict orders, but they are stranded there by contrary winds for a month. Their food runs out. They are slowly starving to death.
Odysseus wanders inland to pray to the gods for help, and he falls asleep. While he's gone, his second-in-command basically stages a mutiny. He looks at the crew and says, there are many ways to die, but starving to death is the most pathetic. I'd rather eat the cows, face the wrath of the gods, and drown in a storm than waste away on this beach.
They slaughter the sacred cattle and roast the meat. When Odysseus wakes up and smells the cooking smoke, he knows it's over.
Helios goes directly to Zeus, demanding vengeance. The moment the winds change and the Greek ship sails out to sea, Zeus hurls a massive lightning bolt directly into the hull. The ship shatters into splinters. The entire crew is thrown into the churning water and drowns. Every single one of them.
The prophecy is fulfilled. Odysseus is the sole survivor.
He clings to a makeshift raft of broken timbers for 9 agonizing days, drifting aimlessly until he washes up on the shores of Aegea. Which brings us to a really fascinating yet completely static chapter of his life.
The 7-year captivity with the nymph Calypso.
This is where our sources highlight a massive psychological duality. Calypso is a beautiful, powerful goddess. She saves him, she shelters him, and she offers him the ultimate prize, immortality. She tells him, stay here, be my husband, and you will never age, you will never die.
But he is essentially her captive. He is forced to be her lover by night.
But what is he doing during the day? For 7 years.
He sits on the rocky headland of the island, staring out across the endless sea, and he just weeps. He is completely broken.
He rejects literal immortality because he wants the pain and the beauty of a mortal life. He just wants to go home, age, and eventually die with his mortal wife. It's incredibly moving. But here is where we have to talk about the actual structure of the book itself, because we've just spent all this time covering the Trojan War, the Cyclops, the underworld, the shipwreck. But if you pick up a copy of the Odyssey today and read book 1, the story doesn't start with any of that.
It starts right here, on Calypso's island, in the 10th year of his wandering.
The narrative starts in medias res, in the middle of things. We open the book, and our great hero is just a weeping man stranded on a beach.
The gods are having a council on Mount Olympus. Athena, who has always favored Odysseus for his brilliant mind, essentially petitions Zeus. She says it's been 10 years since Troy, he has suffered enough, may Calypso let him go.
Zeus agrees. He sends Hermes to deliver the mandate. Calypso is furious, but she can't defy Zeus. She helps Odysseus build a raft. He sails away, but Poseidon, who is still holding that massive grudge about the Cyclops, sees him, gets angry that the other gods went behind his back, and throws one final devastating storm at him. The raft is obliterated.
Odysseus washes ashore on an island called Scheria, naked, battered, and half dead. This is the home of the Phaeacians, a wealthy, peaceful, seafaring people.
He is discovered by the king's daughter, who is doing laundry by the river. She brings him to the palace of King Alcinous and Queen Arete. They are practitioners of excellent hospitality. They bathe him, clothe him, and feed him, all without demanding to know his name first. And this brings us to a scene that I find absolutely mind-bending. The feast.
Oh, it's a moment of incredible narrative complexity.
They are all sitting in the great hall. Odysseus is just a mysterious, anonymous guest. The king calls for the court entertainer, a blind bard named Demodocus, to sing for them. And what does the bard choose to sing about? He sings the greatest hits of the era. He sings about the Trojan War. He sings about Achilles, Agamemnon, and the cunning brilliance of Odysseus and the wooden horse.
And how does our anonymous guest react to hearing a song about himself?
He pulls his heavy cloak over his head to hide his face, and he just starts sobbing uncontrollably. You have a man suffering from profound PTSD, hearing his own trauma, the war where he watched his friends die, being repackaged and performed as dinner entertainment for strangers. The king notices his guest crying, stops the music, and finally asks, "Who are you? Why does a song about Troy break your heart?"
Which forces the reveal. He finally says, "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes."
But I want to linger on how wonderfully meta this scene is. You have a blind bard who sounds exactly like the historical legend of Homer himself, making the protagonist of the poem cry by singing about the protagonist's own backstory. And this prompts Odysseus to take the stage himself. Everything we just talked about, the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops, Circe, the underworld, that isn't narrated by an omniscient third-person narrator. That is Odysseus, sitting in a chair telling the Phaeacians the story of where he's been.
Which introduces a brilliant complication that scholars have debated for decades. Are any of those stories actually true?
That is such a fascinating angle. Why wouldn't we believe him?
Consider the source. Odysseus is the ultimate trickster. His defining character trait, his superpower, is his ability to lie, manipulate, and spin elaborate fictions to survive. The events of the Trojan War, which the bard sang about, are grounded in a grimy, quasi-historical reality of bronze, weapons, and sieges. But the moment Odysseus takes over the narrative, suddenly we are thrust into a world of one-eyed giants, cannibal monsters, magic wands, and trips to the realm of the dead.
So there's an argument that he's making it all up.
It's a very popular critical lens. Some scholars view this as a highly sophisticated, early postmodern narrative. Did he really fight a six-headed monster named Scylla, or did his inexperienced crew just panic, crash the ship onto a jagged reef, and 6 men drowned? Did he really meet a witch who turned his men into pigs, or did his men mutiny, succumb to disease, or desert him in a foreign port?
When you look at his immediate circumstances, he has every reason to lie. He is sitting in a wealthy king's court. He has no money, no crew, no ship, and no leverage. He desperately needs King Alcinous to give him a fleet to get home. So he has to impress them. He has to spin the most captivating, awe-inspiring yarn they have ever heard. He is literally singing for his supper.
Whether it's literal truth within the universe of the poem or just the greatest con job in mythological history, it works flawlessly.
The Phaeacians are utterly mesmerized. They shower him with gifts, gold, bronze, fine cloaks. They load him onto one of their magical, swift ships and ferry him across the sea. He falls into a deep sleep on the deck, and when he wakes up, the ship is gone, and he is sitting on a misty beach. The goddess Athena appears and clears the mist. After 20 years of war and wandering, he is finally looking at the rugged hills of Ithaca.
He has achieved his nostos, his homecoming.
But the tragedy of Odysseus is that getting his feet in the sand was only half the battle. He has arrived, but his home is under occupation.
The situation at his palace is a sociological nightmare. He's been gone for 2 decades. The entire political structure of the island assumes he is dead at the bottom of the sea. His son, Telemachus, who was an infant when Odysseus left, is now a 20-year-old man, but he lacks the physical power and political backing to control the island. And at the center of this storm is Odysseus' wife, Penelope.
Penelope is one of the most brilliant characters in literature. She completely matches her husband in intellect and cunning. For years, she has been besieged by 108 suitors, young, aggressive, arrogant noblemen from Ithaca and the surrounding islands.
They have essentially staged a slow-motion coup. They moved into the palace. They were sleeping with the servant women, butchering Odysseus' livestock, drinking his wine cellars dry, and demanding that Penelope declare her husband dead and pick one of them to marry. Whoever marries the queen claims the throne.
But Penelope stalls them with a trick that is pure Odyssean genius. She tells this mob of men, "I will pick a husband, but I cannot possibly remarry until I finish weaving a burial shroud for my elderly father-in-law, Laertes. It would be a grave disrespect to the family if he died without a proper shroud."
And the suitors, bound by basic cultural norms, have to agree to this.
So she sets up a massive loom in the Great Hall. All day long, in plain sight of the suitors, she weaves this intricate, beautiful shroud. But every single night, she sneaks back into the hall by torchlight and painstakingly unweaves the day's work. She pulls the threads out. She keeps this deception going for 3 entire years before one of her disloyal maids catches her and betrays the secret to the suitors.
It's a brilliant stalling tactic, but by the time Odysseus wakes up on the beach, time has run out. The suitors are restless, and they are actively plotting to ambush and murder Telemachus.
Athena tells Odysseus all of this. She warns him, "Do not just walk through the front gate. If you do, Agamemnon's fate will be yours. You will be hacked to pieces in your own dining hall." So she uses her magic to disguise him. She shrivels his skin, removes his hair, and dresses him in filthy rags. He becomes an unrecognizable, decrepit old beggar.
He has to infiltrate his own life. He has to move through his estate completely unrecognized to test the loyalty of his people. He needs to know who has remained faithful to his memory and who has allied with the suitors.
And as he approaches the palace with a loyal swineherd named Eumaeus, who doesn't realize he's walking with the king, we get what I genuinely believe is the most heartbreaking scene in the entire epic.
The encounter with Argos.
Lying on a pile of manure outside the palace gates, abandoned, covered in ticks and half-starved, is an old dog. It's Argos. Odysseus had trained him as a puppy right before he left for Troy 20 years ago. This dog was supposed to be a magnificent hunting hound. Instead, he was neglected and thrown out with the trash.
And this is where the disguise fails, but in the most tragic way possible.
Through the magical rags, through 20 years of age and dirt, the dog recognizes his master's scent. Argos is too weak to even stand up. He just drops his ears and wags his tail against the dirt. Odysseus sees this. He sees the state of his beloved dog, but he can't react. He can't run over and pet him because Eumaeus would see it, the secret would be out, and the suitors would kill him.
He has to maintain the disguise.
He covertly turns his head, wipes a single tear from his eye, and walks past his dog. And the text says that the moment Argos saw Odysseus, having held on for 20 grueling years just to see his master come home one last time, the dark shadow of death washed over the dog's eyes, and he passed away.
It is a devastating moment. It grounds the massive cosmic scale of the epic into something painfully intimate. The toll of those 20 years wasn't just felt by armies and kings. It was felt by the animals, the servants, the very ecosystem of the home.
Odysseus makes it inside the hall, playing the part of the beggar. He is mocked. The suitors insult him. One of them throws a wooden footstool at his head. He absorbs all the abuse, quietly observing, memorizing faces, and slowly gathering his allies. He reveals his identity to his son Telemachus and to 2 fiercely loyal herdsmen, and they set the trap.
Penelope, pushed to the absolute brink by the suitors, finally announces a contest to decide her hand in marriage.
She goes to the heavily guarded storeroom and brings out Odysseus's old hunting weapon. It is a massive, incredibly stiff recurve bow. She brings it into the hall along with 12 axes. She tells the suitors, "I will marry the man who can easily string this bow and shoot an arrow cleanly through the rings of the 12 axe heads lined up in a row."
It is a test of sheer physical strength and supreme martial skill. It's a test only the true king could pass.
The suitors are arrogant. They think it'll be easy. But one by one, they step up and fail miserably. They grunt, they strain, they even try rubbing the stiff wood with hot animal fat over a fire to soften it. None of them can even bend the bow enough to slip the string over the notch. It is humiliating. And then from the back of the room, the filthy old beggar speaks up and asks if he can give it a try.
The suitors are outraged. They mock him, they threaten him, but Penelope insists that the laws of hospitality demand he be given a chance. She then retires to her quarters.
While the suitors are shouting, Telemachus and the loyal herdsmen quietly lock the massive doors of the hall. The trap is sprung. Odysseus steps up to the bow, and Homer slows the narrative down to a crawl here. The pacing is masterful. He describes Odysseus turning the bow over in his hands, checking it for termites. And then with terrifying ease, he strings the bow. The text compares him to a master musician effortlessly stringing a lyre. He plucks the top bowstring, and it sings with a sharp, clear note like a swallow's cry.
The color completely drains from the suitors' faces.
He picks up an arrow, draws it back from his chair, and shoots it perfectly through the 12 axe heads. He turns to Telemachus and nods. The disguise drops. Athena restores his imposing, terrifying physical form. He strips off the beggar's rags, leaps up onto the threshold, and pours a quiver of arrows out of his feet.
The event that follows is known as the Menesterophonia, the slaughter of the suitors.
He aims his first arrow at Antinous, the most arrogant, vicious suitor of them all. Antinous is just lifting a beautiful, two-handled golden cup of Odysseus' own wine to his lips. The arrow catches him squarely in the throat, piercing all the way through his neck. He drops the cup, kicks over the table, and bleeds out on the floor. And then chaos erupts.
It is an absolute bloodbath.
The suitors realize all the weapons have been stripped from the walls. They're trapped in a locked room with the greatest tactician of the Trojan War, his son, and 2 armed servants. Odysseus shoots them down one by one until he runs out of arrows, and then they finish the rest with spears and swords. All 108 men are slaughtered. The gore is vividly described.
Now, to a modern listener, this level of violence might seem shockingly disproportionate, murdering over 100 men because they ate your food and harassed your wife. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to view this through the cosmic lens of ancient Greek morality, specifically the concept of exania.
Let's delve into Xenia. We mentioned hospitality earlier, but it's more than just being polite, isn't it?
It is a sacred, unbendable law overseen by Zeus himself. Xenia is the bond of guest friendship. If a stranger comes to your door, you are obligated to welcome them, feed them, and protect them. But the guest has equally strict obligations. You must respect the host, you do not steal, and you do not overstay your welcome. The suitors represent the ultimate inversion of Xenia.
They're anti-guests.
Exactly. They consumed the estate, abused the servants, plotted to murder the heir, and relentlessly harassed the queen. In the moral universe of the Odyssey, this isn't just a personal vendetta. It is a restoration of cosmic order. The suitors violated a divine law, and they paid with their lives to rebalance the scales.
The hall is cleansed, the disloyal servants are executed, and finally the moment we've been waiting for, the reunion. Penelope is brought down to the hall. But she doesn't just run into his arms like a movie ending. She's incredibly cautious.
She has survived 20 years by being deeply suspicious of everyone. She needs absolute proof that this isn't an imposter or a god playing a cruel trick on her.
She decides to test him. She casually tells the servant, "Go into the bridal chamber, move my heavy bed out into the hall, and make it up for him so he can sleep." Odysseus hears this and instantly flares up in anger. He says, "Move the bed. That's impossible. Who cut my bed out of the floor? I built that bed myself. I took an old olive tree growing in the courtyard, I carved the bedpost directly out of the living trunk, and I built the stone walls of the bedroom around it. It cannot be moved unless someone took an axe and cut down the tree."
And that outburst is the proof she needed. Only Odysseus, Penelope, and one loyal maid knew the secret of the bed, that it was literally rooted into the living earth of Ithaca.
It is a stunning metaphor for the unmovable, deeply rooted foundation of their marriage. Penelope breaks down. She runs to him, throws her arms around his neck, and they weep together. And Homer gives us this incredibly beautiful poetic detail. They retire to their bed, and the goddess Athena, looking down on them, physically holds back the coming of the dawn. She stops the sun from rising, extending the night so that the reunited couple has hours and hours to hold each other and tell the stories of everything they've survived over the last 20 years.
It is one of the most satisfying, perfectly constructed endings in all of literature.
Which is why it's almost a shame that ancient mythology rarely ever lets a story end happily ever after. If we look beyond the Odyssey, what actually happens next?
If we look at the wider epic cycle, the extended mythological universe, there was a sequel, a lost epic called the Telegony.
We only have fragments and summaries of it today, but what survives is incredibly bizarre. It's almost like a Shakespearean tragedy. So remember when Odysseus spent a year with the witch, Circe? Apparently she had a son by him named Telegonus. When this boy grows up, Circe sends him out into the world to find his father.
Telegonus eventually lands on the shores of Ithaca. He doesn't know where he is, and his crew is hungry, so they start raiding the island for supplies. Odysseus, as the king, rallies his men and comes down to the beach to repel the invaders.
The father and son engage in combat, neither recognizing the other. And Telegonus strikes Odysseus with a spear. But it's not a normal spear. It's tipped with the poisonous spine of a stingray. Odysseus is fatally wounded by his own unrecognized son.
It's a tragic accident, fulfilling a prophecy from the underworld that his death would come out of the sea.
When Telegonus realizes what he's done, he is devastated. He takes Odysseus' body, along with Penelope and Telemachus, back to Circe's island to bury him. And then the plot goes completely off the rails.
It takes a very strange, cyclical turn. Circe uses her magic to make them all immortal, and then they intermarry.
Telegonus marries Penelope, his father's widow, and Telemachus marries Circe, his father's former lover. I mean, it is an incredibly jarring postscript to the beautiful reunion we just talked about, but it proves that these mythic characters didn't just freeze in place. The culture kept generating new, increasingly complex stories around them.
And that evolution didn't start in antiquity. Fast forward 1,000 years, and the character of Odysseus gets radically remixed again in one of the most famous works of the Middle Ages, Dante's Inferno.
Yes, in Canto XC6 of the Inferno, Dante places Odysseus, whom he calls by the Latin name Ulysses, in the 8th circle of hell, burning in a flame among the fraudulent counselors. Now, Dante didn't actually read Greek, so he didn't know Homer's text firsthand. He inherited the Latin tradition, which largely viewed the Greeks as deceitful villains who maliciously destroyed Troy, which was the mythological mother city of Rome.
But Dante invents an entirely new alternative ending for the character. In Dante's vision, Odysseus makes it back to Ithaca, but he can't stand domestic life. His insatiable curiosity, his drive to explore the unknown, overrides his love for his family.
He rallies his old, aging crew, and he gives this incredibly stirring speech. He tells them they were not made to live like brutes, but to follow virtue and knowledge. They sail out of the Mediterranean, past the Pillars of Hercules, which was considered the absolute edge of the mortal world, and they sail out into the open Atlantic until a massive whirlwind strikes their ship and sinks them by divine decree.
It's a complete reframing of his core motivation. Instead of a man desperate for Gnostus, desperate for home and stability, he becomes the ultimate symbol of the relentless, boundary-pushing, and dangerously transgressive human drive for forbidden knowledge.
And what's fascinating is how modern scholars continue to pull new layers out of Dante's version. For instance, our sources point to the classicist Edith Hall, who looks at this through a historical lens. And, we should be clear to you listening that we aren't taking a stance on this one way or the other. We were just impartially recording on how literary critics have interpreted this for a time.
Right, exactly. So scholars like Edith Hall have pointed out that Dante's depiction of a restless, exploring Ulysses took on a very specific resonance during the early Renaissance. There's an argument that this version of the character became a sort of mythological precursor to European colonialism and the concept of othering.
In that interpretation, the bizarre monsters of the Odyssey, the Cyclops, the Laestrygonians, stand in for the accounts of supposedly strange or monstrous races on the edges of the map that European explorers were beginning to hear rumors about. And Odysseus' ultimate defeat in Dante's poem can be seen as symbolizing the Roman and later Christian intellectual domination of the Mediterranean world over the older pagan Greek ways of thinking.
It's a fascinating way to trace the intellectual history of Europe just by watching how different centuries rewrite one specific character.
It really is. Every era projects its own anxieties and values onto him. Which brings us to a crucial question. How did we even get the text to project those values onto? How did an oral poem, breathed into existence by improvising illiterate bards in the 8th century BC, physically survive the rise and fall of empires to land on a bookshelf today?
The textual transmission of the Odyssey is a miracle of preservation. The version we read today is divided neatly into 24 books, but Homer didn't divide it that way.
Right, the bards didn't say, okay, end of chapter 4.
Exactly. That 24-book structure was likely an anachronistic addition made hundreds of years later by scholars working at the Great Library of Alexandria in Egypt. Men like Aristarchus of Samothrace in the 2nd century BC meticulously edited the messy papyrus scrolls and mapped the story to the 24 letters of the Greek alphabet.
And then it had to survive the linguistic jump. The Romans conquered Greece, and they absorbed the mythology. The very first Roman translation of the epic, the Odyssey, was created by a guy named Livius Andronicus in the 3rd century BC. Our sources have this great historical anecdote where later Roman historians note that this specific Latin translation was literally beaten into generations of Roman schoolboys, including famous poets like Horace, by their tutors.
It became the foundational textbook of the classical world. But when the Roman Empire collapsed, knowledge of ancient Greek was largely lost in Western Europe during the Middle Ages. The text survived primarily in the Byzantine East. It wasn't until the Renaissance, when Greek scholars fled west after the fall of Constantinople, that the original language came rushing back to Italy.
The first printed edition of the Greek Odyssey rolled off a printing press in Milan in 1488, produced by a scholar named Demetrios Chalkokondals. And for the English-speaking world, the text exploded into the cultural consciousness with George Chapman's translation in 1616.
Chapman rendered Homer's Greek into muscular, highly energetic English poetry. It was a revelation.
It was so powerful that hundreds of years later, the Romantic poet John Keats read Chapman's translation and was so overwhelmed that he sat down and wrote a famous sonnet about it. He compared the feeling of reading Chapman's Homer to the awe an astronomer feels when a new planet swims into their telescope. But translation is tricky, isn't it? It's never just swapping a Greek word for an English word.
Translation is inherently an act of interpretation. Every single word choice a translator makes colors the narrative, shades the morality, and shapes how the reader perceives the characters.
Which brings up a very recent major milestone in the history of this text. In 2017, the classicist Emily Wilson became the first woman to publish a translation of the Odyssey into English. And the conversation surrounding her work highlighted how much previous translations might have inadvertently or perhaps purposefully inflected the story with their own contemporary biases. And again, for everyone listening, we're just impartially sharing the scholarly debate, not endorsing a particular political viewpoint.
Right, so the sources focus heavily on Wilson's argument regarding gender biases in translation, specifically how previous, predominantly male translators handled the enslaved women in Odysseus' household.
These are the servant women who slept with the suitors while Odysseus was gone and who are brutally executed by Telemachus after the suitors are killed.
Yes. Wilson points out a specific linguistic choice. In the original ancient Greek, when referring to these women, the text often uses the feminine article high. It is a neutral, grammatical term that essentially translates to those female people or those women.
But when you look at how English translators from the Victorian era all the way up through the 20th century rendered that simple neutral Greek word, they used highly charged, morally condemnatory English words. They translated high as sluts or whores or creatures.
Wilson argues that imposing those modern, morally loaded insults onto the ancient text fundamentally alters the reader's understanding of the scene. It shifts the blame onto the enslaved women, making their execution seem like a righteous moral judgment against their promiscuity, rather than what it likely was in the Bronze Age context, a brutal property dispute where a king is destroying assets that were used by his enemies.
By returning to a more literal, neutral translation of the Greek, she strips away centuries of accumulated Victorian moralizing. It allows the modern reader to confront the stark, uncomfortable, and unvarnished reality of the ancient world on its own terms. It just goes to show that even after 2,800 years, the text is still alive. We are still arguing about it, still reshaping it.
And that enduring vitality is exactly why it saturates our pop culture. The DNA of the Odyssey is everywhere.
It is inescapable. It was adapted into an incredibly ambitious Italian silent film all the way back as 1911. If you grew up in the 1980s, you might remember Ulysses 31, which was this bizarre, brilliant French-Japanese animated sci-fi series that essentially took the entire plot of the Odyssey and set it in the 31st century, with spaceships instead of wooden boats.
And arguably the most beloved modern adaptation is the Coen brothers film from the year 2000, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Well, it's a masterpiece. They take the sprawling Mediterranean epic and compress it into Depression-era Mississippi. George Clooney plays Ulysses Everett McGill, who is trying to get home to his wife, Penny. Instead of a literal Cyclops, he gets beaten up by a one-eyed Bible salesman played by John Goodman. It perfectly captures the trickster essence of the original character, and Hollywood is still mining it. Christopher Nolan's reportedly writing and directing a massive new film adaptation slated for 2026. So what does this all mean? We've spent this time unraveling the mechanics of oral storytelling, the horrors of Bronze Age warfare, linguistic tricks with Cyclops, the emotional devastation of the underworld, and the nuances of modern translation. After nearly 3 millennia, why do we keep coming back to this guy in his boat?
Because the Odyssey is the foundational blueprint for how we tell stories, some literary critics argue it is the first true novel, focusing on character psychology and growth rather than just battlefield heroics. With its exploration of bizarre alien environments, you can easily argue it is the primitive ancestor of science fiction. But stripped of all the monsters and the magic, at its absolute core, it is the ultimate exploration of the human desire to find our way home.
It is the universal archetype. Whether you, listening to this deep dive right now, are navigating a terribly difficult career pivot, recovering from a profound personal loss, enduring a long physical journey, or just feeling adrift and lost in your own life, the image of Odysseus wandering a hostile sea is immediately relatable. We are all trying to survive our own personal monsters, navigate our own whirlpools, just to get back to the people we love.
It's a metaphor that will never lose its potency as long as humans are telling stories.
As we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with one final incredibly striking image from our research. We've talked so much today about the massive cosmic scale of this story. But I want to pull the camera all the way in, past the mythology, past the centuries, down to a single, tangible, physical object. The oldest known manuscript fragment of the Odyssey ever discovered was unearthed by archaeologists in Egypt. It dates back to the 3rd century BC during the Ptolemaic era. It is a piece of clay. I want you to imagine holding that dry, ancient, cracked piece of clay in the palm of your hand. Realize that the breath of an illiterate, improvising bard from the 8th century BC, a jazz musician of the ancient world singing by a fire, was somehow captured in the dirt of Egypt. That piece of dirt survived the collapse of Greece, the fall of the Roman Empire, the burning of libraries, the Dark Ages, the World Wars. It survived absolutely everything. Just so the story of a man trying to get home to his family could eventually reach your ears today.
It is a literal, physical piece of the past, bridging the gap between that murky mythological landscape and our modern world.
Thank you so much for exploring it with us today. Keep asking questions, keep reading, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.